Hello and welcome to the Canadian Urban Libraries Council Social Inclusion Audit Training Session. My name is Betty Ferreira and I'm the principal investigator of this research project, and I'm happy to be here with you today to share the results with you. This training session is divided into 5 parts. So the first part is about what is social inclusion and why is it important. And the second part will get into detail on the audit tool itself. So we'll look at the questions and the framework that underpin the audit. And then the last 3 parts, we're going to get into the questions in more detail, and it's divided by indicators. There are 3 indicators to social inclusion, and they are the indicator of openness, intentionality, and inclusion. But let's get started. The Canadian Urban Libraries Council decided to develop a social inclusion audit and a toolkit to help nonprofit organizations, libraries, governments to develop, implement, and evaluate their efforts to remove barriers to social inclusion for marginalized groups. So as a result, we have a social inclusion audit to share with you, and I'd like to take this time to thank the sponsors, in particular the Canadian Urban Libraries Council, as well as the Laidlaw Foundation and the Wellesley Institute for their support of this project. For more information about this project, as well as some of the resources, the literature review, and other research, please go to siatoolkit.com. So what is social inclusion? This is the definition that we are using for the social inclusion audit. Social inclusion is the participatory, authentic, and accountable manner in which organizations uphold and reinforce the principles of access, equity, and thus social inclusion for all. In particular, social inclusion is the manner in which organizations understand and engage their communities, explore, view, and challenge barriers, values, and behaviors, develop, implement, and evaluate systems, programs, policies, and procedures, and it's the manner in which organizations provide equitable access to services and decision-making opportunities and demonstrate the level of inclusion through tangible outcomes. As nonprofit organizations, public services, and government, we have a role to remove barriers to inclusion for marginalized groups. The outcomes of this work are many. Inclusion facilitates these outcomes, as you can see from the slide. It increases employment, it helps reduce poverty, enables civic engagement, eliminates discrimination and racism, and it promotes access to a variety of public resources and institutions. So why did we decide to do an audit in particular for this work? Well, audits are evaluation tools. They formalize, inform, and guide the removal of barriers to inclusion in a comprehensive and structured manner. So this allows an organization to look objectively at their work and to use the same tool to assess their level of inclusion year after year. If social inclusion is new to you or to your organization, perhaps before you start diving into the audit tool and the toolkit, you should go back to the office with these 5 questions and ask these questions of your staff. The 5 questions are: what groups are excluded in our community? What are the barriers to inclusion for marginalized groups in our community? What will inclusion increase access to for them? What does social inclusion facilitate? And finally, why should our organization use a social inclusion audit tool? At the same time, you may want to have a discussion that includes some of the challenges of this work. While very exciting to get into removing barriers to inclusion for marginalized groups in your community, there are some challenges that you need to be aware of in order to be successful in this work. These are some of the barriers that we saw when we conducted this community-based research project and assessed other audit tools internationally. The challenges include that, 1, it isn't a priority. Social inclusion needs to be a priority of the CEO or the executive director. In all the research that we conducted, the most successful projects were the ones where the leadership at the top was thoroughly invested in the outcomes. Secondly, The other challenge is the community isn't consulted. We were surprised to find out the number of other social inclusion audits and cultural competency-based assessments that didn't actually include the participation of target groups in its development. To do this work, you need to consult the community. They know their needs the most. Third, inclusion is owned by a select few. This can't be a project of a committee. This needs to be a new lens for the organization to view its work, threaded through management, non-management positions, and through all the programs of the organization. And finally, the last challenge, one of the most significant ones as well, is insufficient financial and human resources. This work will cost some money and it will take some time. So ensure that if you're about to embark on social inclusion, that sufficient financial and human resources are allocated. And that concludes part 1. Stay tuned to part 2 when we get into the social inclusion audit and the questions and the framework. Thanks.